The Ukrainian Defense Forces continue to thwart the Kremlin's plans to capture Pokrovsk, holding the line and repelling assaults by Russian occupiers. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there have already been 112 combat engagements on the front since the beginning of the day. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up in the report.
The Ukrainian armed forces recorded how the Russian army struck Myrnohrad in the Donetsk region with a guided aerial bomb. The footage shows a powerful bomb hitting a large multi-story building. A column of fire and smoke rose above it. Ukrainian defenders note that Russian forces continue to turn the Ukrainian city into ruins, literally wiping it off the face of the earth. Despite this, the defense forces are steadfastly holding their positions in this area. According to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, in particular in the Pokrovsk Direction, Ukrainian soldiers repelled nearly half of all recorded Russian attacks on the front. Military experts note that the Russians are not giving up their attempts to infiltrate Pokrovsk in small groups, and the Ukrainian soldiers constantly have to clear the territory. Moreover, the weather conditions are making the defenders' work more difficult.
When the fog clears, it turns out that the enemy has infiltrated some positions that were considered clear just yesterday, so we have to start all over again. That's why any diagrams, any maps that we can see right now regarding Pokrovsk, unfortunately, they become outdated in a very short time. In other words, the situation is quite dynamic.
The situation also remains difficult in the Kostiantynivka, Oleksandrivka, Lyman, and Sloviansk directions. There, the number of repelled attacks by the invaders is in the dozens. Ukrainian defenders have called the repelling of a Russian assault within a single village in the Kharkiv region a miniature war. To accomplish the military objectives, several branches of the armed forces were mobilized here at once: infantry, tanks, and drones.
It was necessary to eliminate the Russian occupiers who were trying to gain a foothold in Dvoryansky. It was difficult to quickly drive out the invaders using infantry alone, as well as with drones due to cloudiness and fog. Therefore, heavy weaponry was used, 2 tanks. In the current conditions of the war, the open use of armored vehicles has become very unusual. As a result, the enemy suffered heavy losses and retreated. From a statement by the 3rd Separate Heavy Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Facebook,
On the Kupiansk section of the front, according to Ukrainian soldiers, Russian forces are also trying to advance in small groups and push Ukraine's defense forces beyond the left bank of the Oskil River. But all these enemy efforts are simply neutralized by the Ukrainian troops.
The defense forces are conducting active operations aimed at locating enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups, capturing them, and also eliminating them. And there are concrete results. I would like to believe, and I think that in the short term, we will be able to ensure that not even enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups remain present in the city of Kupiansk itself.
In just one day, the defenders destroyed a tank, 2 armored vehicles, and nearly 24 enemy artillery systems, as well as shot down almost 400 enemy drones and more than 40 cruise missiles. Also, the day before, the defense forces eliminated 809 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have exceeded 1,162,000 soldiers.
The Russian occupiers have handed over another 1,000 bodies to the Ukrainian side, which, according to Moscow, belong to fallen soldiers of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. As reported by the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, identification of the deceased will begin in the near future. The headquarters expressed gratitude to all agencies and organizations that helped facilitate this exchange. Ukraine has reported systematic violations by Russia of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Evidence is being collected and documented by the competent Ukrainian authorities. In this regard, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is calling on the international community to prevent Russia from being elected to the Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, whose meeting will take place on November 25th.
The international community is already responding to these violations and imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation for the use of prohibited chemical substances on the battlefield. We thank the United States of America and the United Kingdom, New Zealand and the European Union for their principled and timely response, as well as for their consistent sanctions measures which increase pressure on the aggressor country and help hold it accountable for violations of international law, and for the statement by the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs regarding Russia's systematic violations of the Chemical Weapons Convention.
On November 20th, World Children's Day is celebrated around the globe. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, more than 700 young Ukrainians have become victims of Russian aggression. Tens of thousands have been forcibly taken from Ukrainian territory under the guise of evacuation, but in reality they have been abducted. Many have been deprived of a real childhood, and instead of the usual pastimes, they are engaged in volunteering. Next, about children from the Kharkiv region who are helping the front.
Alexander is 14 years old. He is from the frontline city of Donetsk, which is located 25 kilometers from the border with Russia. In November 2022, at the school where the boy studies, his homeroom teacher suggested that the children join the volunteers and help them weave nets for the armed forces of Ukraine. Alexander was one of the first to respond, and for 3 years now he has been cutting, arranging and packing strips intended for camouflage.
The fabric is, in fact, about
a meter in size. So we fold it in half, then fold it in half again. We cut here at the end and here at the beginning. Then we fold it like this and cut it into 4 parts. This fabric is for ghillie suits.
Alexander's mother, Olena, helps her son and also spends all her free time weaving nets. She says that in 2022, when they were just starting out, both of them had blisters on their fingers because they spent hours cutting up sheets and duvet covers that people brought them. Now they use special fabric, and there's already a waiting list of Ukrainian armed forces units from all over Ukraine for their nets. Olena admits that her son's childhood was neither calm nor safe, but he is ready to keep helping the army.
Their whole childhood has passed like this. They couldn't even play or meet up with friends, and sometimes it was scary to let them go outside. In Donetsk, if it's not missiles, it's shaheeds or something else overhead. At their age, they should just be out playing.
All our soldiers are now serving in the armed forces of Ukraine under unbearable conditions, making truly titanic efforts and risking their lives there, in the trenches, on the front lines. That's why it's the conscious duty of every Ukrainian to help the army.
Even 3 years after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, you can still find shell casings on the streets of Slatin village in the Donetsk district. The settlement is still being actively shelled by the Russian army. The Pishchulin family lives here, mother Alyona and her children, Matvey and Ulyana. Alyona is an artist by training, and in 2023 she turned a shell casing into an art object for the first time.
Each of us still has a child inside. Maybe it's because I'm always interacting with my children. That's probably why the child inside me is so naive, and I hope that everything will be all right, because it's still hard to believe that such horror is happening.
During the full-scale Russian invasion, 16-year-old Matvey and 14-year-old Ulyana, together with their mother, painted dozens of rocket and bomb casings. They even turned a tank part into a creative piece.
To be honest, honestly speaking, it's not like I really know.
Honestly, I can't say I know exactly what it is, but I understand that it's a kind of symbol of what's happening right now. Not just shell casings, but many other things. Helmets, various items, some boxes. All of this speaks to what's going on. Over all this time, we've accumulated a lot of such artifacts, you could say, and in this way, we remind people not to forget that all of this is still happening and that something needs to be done.
Children paint on metal canvases so that the finished artworks on the shell casings can later be put up for various auctions. Their goal is to raise funds for the needs of the military.
Why did you take 2 shades of blue paint?
To finish painting the flowers.
I see. And what is the yellow for?
And what do you need the yellow for?
For the center part. So your flowers will be yellow and blue? So your flowers will be yellow and blue?
Yes?
Russia's war against Ukraine has deprived Matvey, Ulyana, Sasha, and many other Ukrainian children of a peaceful and safe childhood. At present, more than 1.5 million children under the age of 18 are living in territories temporarily occupied by Russia and are at risk of being forcibly taken away. About 20,000 young Ukrainians have already been deported to the Russian Federation or to occupied territories. Since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, there have been more than 700 children killed and approximately 2,285 children have been reported as wounded as a result of the conflict.
Russia systematically terrorizes Ukrainians and is not interested in peace. This statement was made by the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel. He made this comment in response to yesterday's Russian shelling of Ternopil, which claimed the lives of 26 civilians, including 3 children. The Czech leader emphasized that Ukraine has endured yet another terrible night. And this Russian strike is a vivid reminder that Putin's cruelty knows no bounds. Russian officials like to claim that they do not attack civilians. But the truth is obvious. Russia is a country that systematically terrorizes ordinary people in a neighboring country and shows no respect for the rules of civilized coexistence. It is not interested in peace. That is precisely why its success in Ukraine must not be allowed. Another Russian attack on Ukraine, including a deadly airstrike on an apartment building in Ternopil, was also condemned by Moldovan President Maya Sandu. She called on the international community to respond to the killing of peaceful Ukrainians. Civilians were killed, and this once again demonstrates the Kremlin's contempt for humanity. These atrocities must not become routine and require a unified international response to stop Russia's aggression. Maya Sandu, President of Moldova, on the social network X. Against the backdrop of terrorist attacks by the Russian Federation, the European Union intends to include Ukraine in its military Schengen projects. This was announced by the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas. As Politico writes, the EU and NATO are seeking to reduce bureaucratic procedures to simplify the movement of troops and weaponry across Europe. How do partners plan to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities, and what weapons transfers to Kiev are currently being discussed in EU capitals? Kristina Dombrovskaya found out.
On November 19th, the European Commission presented a large-scale package of measures to enhance Europe's defense capabilities. At its core is a plan for moving troops and weaponry to deter Russia. The European Union plans to include Ukraine in its so-called military Schengen projects.
We want to expand military mobility corridors into Ukraine. This would serve as a security guarantee, meaning we could provide support more quickly if needed. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
EU Commissioner for Defense Andrius Kubilius noted that after peace is established, the Ukrainian army could be present in all states bordering the EU, starting with the Baltic countries together with the German brigade and American battalions.
In fact, we are looking for ways to strengthen military mobility capabilities for delivering military cargo to Ukraine. And of course, one of these routes could go through Romania and Moldova into Ukraine. And that's what we will be looking for: how we can improve, how we can help, and how we can create both the necessary infrastructure and all the required regulations at the borders.
The goal of the military Schengen project is to create a pan-European military mobility area by the end of 2027, ensuring the rapid, safe, and coordinated movement of troops, equipment, and military resources across the bloc's internal borders. And Ukraine has the most experienced military personnel in Europe. And this is invaluable for other allies, writes Politico. Currently, the procedure for crossing borders in different EU countries can take up to 45 days, as roads, bridges, railways, and bureaucratic procedures in the European Union cannot ensure a rapid response in the event of a threat.
Military mobility is a key factor in defense posture and capabilities, which Europe urgently needs to reliably deter its adversaries and respond to any crisis. Once launched, the system will provide the military with priority access to infrastructure, vehicles, and essential services. Situations requiring rapid, large-scale military movement are rarely announced in advance. This is according to a publication by Politico, citing a draft of the new European Commission plan.
Meanwhile, Germany is doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian armed forces with long-range missile systems, as well as to organize joint production on Ukrainian territory. This was stated by Chancellor Friedrich Merz at a press conference with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. In addition, the German leader emphasized that Berlin and Stockholm are expanding their strategic partnership, particularly in the areas of defense, politics, security, as well as in matters related to assistance to Ukraine.
We are working with the Ukrainian government on implementing projects for long-range weaponry. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We have agreed not to discuss the details publicly, as we believe that the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support. I can only say that we are doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian army with weapon systems of the necessary range. And the number of such systems will increase in the coming weeks and months if necessary, up to and including the production of such weaponry within Ukraine itself.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has presented its developments in defense innovations to the United States. This was reported by Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal at a meeting with the American delegation led by U.S. Secretary of the Army Daniel Driscoll in Kyiv on November 20th. He noted that Kyiv, Washington, have focused on implementing the defense agreements between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. Shmihal thanked the United States for approving the sale of a support package for the Patriot air defense system worth $105 million.